Hi everyone, my name is Gisela Kagy and I am a professor in the economics department here at Vassar, and I'm excited to talk to you today about some of my research and just to welcome you to the college and to this experience. And yeah, so let's get started. I'm gonna share my screen and I've put together some information about a project that I'm working on that I think is very interesting, and hopefully some of you will as well. So as I said, I'm a professor in the economics department, and my research is really focused on how women are doing in low-income countries. And this project in particular is focusing on the impact of the current COVID crisis on the lives of women in the garment industry in Ethiopia. And before I kind of jump into everything, I first and foremost want to just say welcome to Vassar. And we are excited that you're here. We're excited to meet you and get to know you and to go through this whole experience together. And yeah, so without further ado, let me jump into some of the details about some work that I'm doing this summer. So as everyone is aware, we are living through an unprecedented crisis. The COVID crisis is a public health crisis, but it's also turned into an economic crisis. And this economic crisis is being felt differently in different places. There's just been a sharp economic downturn all over the world, and this has led to a significant drop in demand for specific goods. Some goods is going up, but many goods is going down. And for the goods in particular that I'm interested in is garments, clothes, right? And so the drop in demand of this threatens the livelihood of low-wage work production in low-income countries where many of these clothes are made and produced and then exported. So for this, I'm interested in Ethiopia. I have been doing research in Ethiopia for many years, trying to understand the garment industry in Ethiopia, understanding the shift that the Ethiopian economy has taken from being agricultural to more manufacturing. And so I've already had teams set up there to do research work, and so this seemed like a natural fit, as well as it's a growing nation. It's becoming just kind of a focal point for Africa as well. And so a real goal with this project too is to get data to policymakers ASAP, right? So this crisis we're living in, there's so many unknowns, and people are really trying to make decisions about how do we best help people during this time. And we're trying to get information and data into the hands of policymakers so that they can do that. And then let me acknowledge the team that is on this project. So it is not me by myself. I am working with a fabulous team of other researchers at different institutions at NYU Abu Dhabi, World Bank, and University of Oxford, we're all putting our brains together and making this happen. So why Ethiopia? So this crisis is happening all over the world, and there are many, many studies happening about the impact of this crisis. And so Ethiopia in particular, right, has made a very large shift away from agricultural to light manufacturing. The government has made it its stated purpose to leverage the people, leverage the labor, and try to switch into light manufacturing, into the ready-made garment industry. And so for this study, we're going to look at workers from Ethiopia's largest industrial park. So it's called the Hawassa Industrial Park. And so these industrial parks were set up in Ethiopia to try to attract investors. And they are just a large kind of area of land that has many, many factories in it where, garments are produced. Okay, and so we're going to talk to many workers from this industrial park. So at its full capacity, this industrial park has about 60,000 workers in it at any given day. And we're going to document how these workers' lives are changing during the COVID crisis. So as of right now, is when I'm filming this, July 27th, the crisis in Ethiopia, especially in Hawassa, has largely been an economic one, not a public health crisis. There are many cases in Addis of the virus, but the virus, there's not many reported cases yet in Hawassa. So, but this crisis has had a large impact on the industrial park due to the rapid decrease in demand that the world has seen for clothes. And so a little bit about the survey design. So in March, my research team and I, just started thinking about this and thinking about how could we, kind of contribute knowledge and contribute understanding to the current crisis and what's happening. And so what we're doing is we're interviewing approximately 4,000 workers that were working in the industrial park as of January 1st, 2020. So everybody in our sample was working as of January. And we're interviewing people every 2 weeks for the next 6 months to document how their lives are changing from the crisis. These interviews are all happening over the phone. We're calling people. And we started data collection in early May. Okay, so the data I'm going to talk about today is from May and June, and the data I'm going to talk about today focuses on food insecurity, focuses on mental health questions, employment, and migration. We are also collecting information about aspirations. What do people want to do? We're collecting information about how dating behavior changes, how trust in government changes, about more information. But what I'm going to be talking about today is the following list. So just to give a quick understanding of who these workers are that work in the industrial park, right? Keep in mind the 4,000 people that we're talking to is a random sample, right? We're randomly sampling out of this kind of 60,000 universe of people, okay? And we're looking at this. So these are very young women. So the data I'm going to show you today is just for women. So about 90% of the workers in the park are women. Okay, 10% are men. The men that work in the park are different. So we're gonna just focus on women just to understand the story for women. Okay, so these are young women. So they're on average 21 years old. Very few of them are married. Only 8% of them are married. Most have finished 10th grade, but only about a third have finished 12th grade, right? That's what this mean column here is showing us. That's the average, right? Very few, this UPSNP is kind of this like social safety net program. Very few are actually benefiting from the social safety net program as well. Okay, so the really key first thing that we are explaining to policymakers and getting out there is the impact on employment, right? So remember, all of these women were working as of January, okay? The dots here on this graph show you the averages, right? The number of women that are in these separate categories, okay? So this says that 56% of women, right, are employed and working at the time this data was collected. So this was in May, right? So 100% were working in January, and only 56% are now working in May, okay? 24% are on paid leave, 7% are on unpaid leave, 11% left, and 2% were terminated, right? So already, right, we are seeing a massive shock to the employment status of these women due to the crisis, right? Due to the decrease in orders that has been happening, right, for these kind of global supply chains. Demand has just gone away, and so these jobs have just evaporated, right? So then it begs the question, right? So if women aren't working in the Hawassa Industrial Park, what are they doing, right? The vast majority, 91%, as we can see here, that's what this dot right here is representing, have no other form of employment. Okay, so this is saying, right, these women are losing their jobs in the industrial park due to the decrease in global demand, the economic downturn that's happening, right? And they're having a very hard time finding other employment. Okay, only 3%, right, are in another job, 2% are self-employed. Okay, but the vast majority have not found other employment. Okay, so just to kind of wrap up the thoughts on employment so far, right, approximately half of the respondents are still working, right? Of those working, only 42% are working the same number of hours, right? So it didn't actually show this graph, but this is another thing that we know, right, is you may still have your job, but the hours may have been cut back, right? Wages may have been cut back. There's other margins instead of just have a job, not have a job, that matter here. Okay, very few have found another job if they are not working, but many are looking for another job. Okay, and those not looking for another job, right, are too worried about COVID. Okay, And then this is an interesting statistic that I think surprises some people from this data. So of those women that aren't working, right, 81% that are not employed said that they would like to return to their jobs in the industrial park at some point, right? These jobs are desirable for these workers, right? And they would like to return at some point. Okay, location and migration. So a big question is what is happening to these kind of low skill, low wage positions in low income countries, right? There's been various degrees of lockdowns that have happened. And so what's happening? Where are these people going? Okay, so the big thing to know is that if they're employed and working, 96% are still in the urban area of Hawassa. Hawassa is an urban area. It's not the capital of Ethiopia, but it's a more urban area, right? And then what we see is if you're on paid leave, unpaid leave, or if otherwise left, drastically drops off and you leave that urban area. And I'm not showing it here in a graph, but we know from talking to these people that they are going back to their rural home areas. We are seeing massive urban to rural migration due to this job loss that is happening. And this is not unique to Ethiopia. People are documenting this in many countries all over the world, that there's been large migration from urban centers back to rural areas during this crisis. Then we asked people, are you in your desired location? Yes or no, right? And so I'm graphing here the average who said yes, okay? For those that are currently living in Hawassa, that's the more urban area where the industrial park is. And then the hollow triangle, right, is those not in Hawassa, okay? So what we see overwhelmingly is those people that are in Hawassa, right, the filled in circles, are more likely to say, yes, I am in my desired location, okay? Those that are not in Hawassa, and these are people back in the rural area for the most part, very few people went to Addis, right? These are people back in the rural area. They are saying, I'm not in my desired location as often, right? So people who, for example, right, that left, so they're not employed that they left, only 40% of them are saying that they are in their desired location, right, if they're not in Hawassa, compared to 78%, right, of people who left who are in Hawassa, they're saying they're in their desired location. Okay, so this is kind of showing us a little bit about preferences of where people want to be, right? And it's looking like people more want to be in Hawassa than back in the rural areas. Okay, then we asked people, well, what are your barriers to migration, right? Why are you not in your desired location? Okay, so if you were not in your desired location, the overwhelming response for what the barriers to migration were was lack of money, right? 50% said that they lacked money, okay? Let me also explain quickly too, right? You see the circle and then the diamond and then you see these little bars, okay? These little bars are just telling us how confident we are that that's the true average in the data, right? So the fact that it's really narrow tells us as researchers looking at this data and analyzing this data that we're really confident it's about 50% of the people that are saying that there is a lack of money as a barrier to migration. Okay. Another key thing we were interested in was violence. So something we're hearing about a lot in the news is violence concerns and health concerns. And we can see from the data here that safety and violence concerns are very small. Very few people are citing those as like major reasons for why they're not migrating. Health concerns is more prominent, right? But lack of accommodation and lack of money are the major reasons why people are not migrating. So just to sum up what we're seeing so far in terms of migration, there's significant movement away from Hawassa if you're not currently working to rural areas, right? However, many respondents prefer to be in Hawassa, right? And high costs are keeping people from migrating. Okay, next finding, looking at food insecurity and expenses. Okay, so what we've asked people is in the last 7 days, how much money did you spend on food, right? And so that's what I'm showing up here, any food expenses in the last 7 days. And this is done by, the circle is those are in Hawassa, and the hollow triangle, or sorry, diamond here is those not in Hawassa. And we see a really big difference here in terms of food. Those people that are in Hawassa, 95% of them had food expenses in the last 7 days. However, if you were not in Hawassa, you were in a rural area, only 65% had any sort of food expenses in the last 7 days. Okay, and so this leads us to believe, right, going back to the rural area where people are depending more on agriculture, kind of home production agriculture for food rather than expenses. Okay, we also see this with food insecurity questions. So we asked people the question, right, are you worried? Have you been worried in the last 7 days that you haven't had enough to eat? Right? Yes or no? Okay. 60% of those people in Hawassa said that they have been worried about not having enough to eat. Okay. Only 44% of those not in Hawassa have said that they've been worried about not having enough to eat. Right? So this also suggests the theory that people are going back to the rural areas, right, where there's home production of food, and they're actually more food secure there in the rural areas than they were in the urban areas. Okay. Another thing that we're seeing that's really interesting that's popping out, right, is we've asked people about their incomes and their expenses, and we're able to compare their most recent monthly salary, which is around 1,100 birr, right, and kind of comparing this up to the expenses that they have had in the last month, and comparing their, you know, how much somebody is making versus what their average expenses are. And we're doing this because we're trying to be in conversation with policymakers who are attempting to come up with social safety net programs to get money and assistance to workers who have lost their jobs, and trying to understand of how big does that assistance need to be. And this data is really helping us, and it's helping us be in conversation with policymakers so that they can make decisions about how big aid packages should be. Okay, so overall, we see high levels of food insecurity, right? 60% of those in Hawassa said that they were worried in the last 7 days they did not have enough to eat, right? Rates are higher for those in Hawassa, and on average, expenses are larger than income, right? And we're in dialogue with policymakers about what to do. Okay, another thing that we collected data on was depression screening for those in the sample. And what we can see here is that the depression screening results, so this is equal to 1 if the measure that we used shows that yes, you should be evaluated for depression. So about kind of, you know, roughly a quarter, right, of all of the workers screened yes for this. Right? But what's important here is this doesn't really change very much by employment status. This is looking at it by employment status. Because one could think, right, oh, if I get laid off from my job or if I'm on unpaid leave, right, I could be more at risk for depression, right? And these preliminary results that we've just collected, right, are showing that there's not a large difference in the depression screening tool that we have used by these different employment categories. Something else that we're interested in, right, is people's knowledge of COVID. So we asked a detailed set of questions about knowledge of COVID, and in general, overall, respondents are very well informed about COVID, right? Ethiopia has undertaken several information campaigns to try to spread the word about COVID and try to educate people about how to protect themselves and how to stop the spread from COVID, right? Only 2% of people, of the respondents in the sample, believe that spiritual beliefs can help with COVID, right? And only 1% believes that traditional medicine can act as a cure, right? And so overall, people are very well informed about COVID, okay? So again, this kind of leads to this research and trying to understand the impacts of the COVID crisis, right? From a public health lens, but also from an economic lens of understanding what's happening to people. Okay, so that's a little bit about the data that I'm collected and the project I'm doing. And you know, a little bit more about me in general. This is the type of research that I'm really passionate about and I talk about in my classes, what I teach in the economics department. I am, you know, generally interested in the fields of labor and development within economics. I have done projects in many countries all over the world, have lived all over the world. And so my key projects right now, though, are in Bangladesh, Ghana, and Ethiopia. So I look at, you know, this COVID work, the impact of the COVID downturn on garment workers. I have other work that's looking at gender inequality in Ghana and other work in Bangladesh that's also looking at how family planning and early childhood vaccines help women and children in Bangladesh. Okay. Courses I teach that I would hope to someday see you in. I teach development economics, which is actually geared towards freshmen. So please sign up for it. It's offered in the spring. I teach it every spring, so you can go ahead and sign up for that if you're interested. I also teach a senior seminar that's called the Economics of Inequality and Discrimination, which is topics I'm very passionate about as well. And then I teach in the econ core classes, I teach the microeconomic theory course, and I try to really tie in a lot of these applied topics to understanding the core of micro theory and why we're interested and how this all makes sense. So thank you very much. It's good to do this and you know, and not see you. I wish I could see you, but to kind of put this out there, and I hope that I will get to meet you all at some point soon. And again, welcome to Vassar.